Give my regards to Broadway. Hey, I'm Amy and welcome back. And because America's birthday is right around the corner, I thought I would check the most patriotic musical off the 1001 checklist, Yankee Doodle Dandy. If you do not know what the 1001 movie checklist or 1001 movie challenge is, it's basically a challenge I gave myself to watch every single movie on the 1001 movies you must see before you die list. So far I've watched 149 movies. If you would like to know more information or kind of just follow along with everything I've done so far, there is a link to a playlist up there. And like always, let's get started with a very short summary of the movie. George M. Cohan tells President Roosevelt his life story from his humble beginnings in his family's vaudeville show, meeting both his wife Mary and his business partner Sam, writing some of America's most beloved songs, retiring, and finally his comeback leading up to FDR presenting him with the Congressional Medal of Honor.
To George M. Cohan, for his contribution to the American spirit, Over There and Grand Old Flag, presented by Act of Congress.
Something I did not realize until after I had watched the movie and actually started doing my research for this video was that George M. Cohan is actually a real life person. This whole movie is based around his life, or is kind of the story of his life. I don't know how true it is, if it's inspired by real events kind of thing, or if it's actually real, because they don't really talk about that at the beginning of the movie like a lot of based on real life movies do today. But he is an actual real live playwright, or was a real life playwright. He's not alive anymore. I would hope not, because this movie is set in like the late 1800s, early 1910s. But he actually did write some of the most beloved American patriotic songs like Yankee Doodle Dandy, Grand Old Flag, Give My Regards to Broadway. I'm pretty sure he wrote those. Those are like some of the most iconic songs in musical history. He was the first person to get a Congressional Medal of Honor from the president in the acting kind of profession, I believe, like in the stage performance profession. I think that's kind of a really great achievement, and it's understandable why they made this movie about him, but it's something that I didn't really realize that this was a real thing, or that he was even a real person, until I started doing my research, which is why I do these things, to learn these kind of cool, fun history facts, not only about film history, but about real life history. And yeah, I probably should have known that going in, but one, I say this for pretty much every single one of these videos I try to go into these movies with zero knowledge, or the least amount of knowledge I can have, because I want to form my own opinions and observations in my own terms, kind of think for myself and not put what I've read other people say into my head to kind of mess with it. That's why I usually have a research portion of an episode and then my own thoughts portion of an episode, because I want to kind of marry the two, but not use what I haven't found in research into my own thoughts. So try to keep those separately. And then number two, I really know nothing about Broadway or stage plays. I just know stuff about filmmaking, motion pictures. I don't know anything about live performances. So that's why I didn't know that this guy was real. Like I said before, this movie has some of the most iconic songs in it that just a lot of people really associate with the 4th of July and just patriotism in America. Not just necessarily like our national anthem or things like that. A lot of people sing Yankee Doodle Dandy as kind of a thing on the 4th of July. Like, I've had Yankee Doodle Dandy stuck in my head for almost a month now, ever since I started planning this video. It's just something so prevalent in our culture, at least here in the States.
A real live nephew of my Uncle Sam, born on the 4th of July. I've got a Yankee Doodle sweetheart, she's my Yankee Doodle joy. Yankee Doodle came to London just to ride the ponies. I am that Yankee Doodle boy.
And Grand Old Flag is another one that not a lot of people may know, but when you hear it, like, you won't know it unless you actually heard it.
You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave.
And once you hear it, you're like, yeah, I do know that song. And then Give My Regards to Broadway is just something that I think most Broadway nerds would know, but I feel like I had heard it before somewhere else.
Give my regards to Broadway. Remember me to Herald Square. Tell all the gang at 42nd Street that I will soon be there.
There are songs that you just know. You really just, you know, and you wouldn't know necessarily that they came from this movie or that they came from this specific playwright, but they're there for everyone to know, and everyone probably does know in America in their subconscious. And the reason I chose this film, like I said at the very top of the episode, is the 4th of July is on Wednesday, and for some reason I just really associate Yankee Doodle Dandy, and a lot of people probably do, the movie and the song with the 4th of July and Independence Day. And really, when it comes down to it, in the movie, there's not really a lot of 4th of July stuff. I mean, George was born on the 4th of July, so there's that. But the reason it's called Yankee Doodle Dandy is because obviously George wrote the song, but he is also a very patriotic man, loyal to his country, and in pretty much every single one of his plays that he did or any of his performances, once he kind of became famous for writing these kind of songs, he made performances that were based around being very patriotic. That's kind of really the only thing it has to do with Americans' independence, or America's independence. That makes more sense. Either way, it is still a very patriotic movie and really kind of goes along with the theme of this week within the United States in general. Like always, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the actors or characters in general. I'm going to really only talk about James Cagney as the actor because, I mean, the whole movie is about him. You really don't need to go more into his character. And I will kind of talk a little bit about that later when I have my final thoughts on the whole movie in general. But just James Cagney is such a very talented man. He was just a really good example of what actors were like in the golden age of Hollywood, which this movie came out at its peak. Golden age of Hollywood is probably one of my absolute favorite eras of cinema. It has just some of the most amazing movies. It was during the time of the studio system kind of being built up, where actors were kind of tied to different studios for either a certain amount of films or a certain period of time. And I think James Cagney was tied to Warner for a certain number of movies when he made this, and he just did such a great job. He's just the epitome of what great actors were in the 40s. They were singers, they were dancers, they were amazing performers. A lot of them were very funny, which you wouldn't think, especially in kind of a musical drama or just a plain drama. Not necessarily that this was just a plain drama. It was a musical, it was a comedy, it was a drama. James Cagney was able to slip in or at least pull off some jokes that still last to today.
That's one way of keeping him in the theater. Cohan does it with talent. Look, produces his own plays, writes his own books, lyrics, and music, plays the leads, and is a great dancer.
He dances, eh? When does he get time to practice?
When you write your own plays, you don't have to practice. Cohan's done all right. He's given the world Yankee Doodle Dandy. What's Foy done for his country?
He gave him 7 kids.
Does he dance?
One of the best.
When does he get time to practice?
Say, listen, young fella. My name's Eddie Foy.
I know it.
I still was laughing out loud at some of the jokes that he was saying, so I think that's really great. It's very vaudevillian style of acting because he was in vaudeville at the time of, well, James Cagney wasn't in vaudeville at the time of this movie. The time of the movie was set when vaudeville was big. So he really brought the vaudeville style of acting to this, and I really loved that because I do really love a good vaudeville-esque film because that's what kind of inspired the silent movie era, and silent films are some of my absolute favorites. They are just so good, kind of over the top because you kind of have to be, but I've talked about that before and I will probably do an entire video of me talking about why I love silent films so much sometime in the future. But character-wise, my absolute favorite character in this was George's wife, Mary. I don't remember the name of the actress that played her. I should, because I did a bunch of research, but it just slips my mind at the moment. But she was such a very, very, very strong female lead. She is very much unlike any other female lead in any musical or even drama kind of movie like this from this era. When George gave the song that he wrote for her, literally titled Mary, to a bigger star for his show, she didn't mind. She didn't get upset with him. She kind of played it off, accepted the fact. And when he actually told her, she already knew. She did that whole thing where you women know if a guy messed up because they bring home a huge box of chocolates and a huge bouquet of flowers, which is what he did. And she was totally okay with it.
Oh, darling, something I forgot to tell you.
Yes, dear.
I gave your song to Faye Templeton tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Darling, you hear me? I gave your song to Faye Templeton tonight.
Yes, I know. I knew you did, dear, when you brought the candy and flowers.
In most musicals like this, the woman would probably get all upset and run away and cry and be mad, and then they would break up, and that would be like the huge climax of the movie, and then they would get back together later on. Well, I guess them getting back together would be like the big climax of the movie. But the reason that she kind of understands why George did this and she's so forgiving of him is because she knows the song is written for her, because it's basically, it says her name in it constantly. But she also knows that George really does love her and that the song is so amazing, and she knows that if somebody else sings it because they're a better performer than her or something like that, that it will still live on and on and on because he wrote it. And so she's okay with that. And then one last thing before I kind of wrap this all up with my final thoughts. I got very serious Citizen Kane vibes from this movie. Citizen Kane came out in 1941 and this movie came out in 1942. But I can see very, very clearly where it pulled from Citizen Kane. But I had some of these thoughts before I knew that this was pulled off of a real life person. So it kind of makes a little bit, it kind of messes up my thought process here, but Citizen Kane is also pulled from real life in a certain capacity with the Hearst family, or the, like, Hearst patriarch or whatever, I don't know his actual name. But there are some similarities, at least in a storytelling and thematic capacity within Yankee Doodle Dandy, that are also in Citizen Kane. It is definitely not like cinematography and directorially on the same level as Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane is probably one of the greatest movies ever made. It's such a great movie that you can see in a lot of different films where they pull from this movie. But specifically in Yankee Doodle Dandy, it starts off with kind of the present, or what you would consider the present, and then something happens and it kind of goes back to the very beginning and tells a story straight through. While in Citizen Kane, it's broken up by the person doing the research, going back to talk to different people with voiceovers from them.
We were talking about the first Mrs. Kane.
What was she like?
She's like all the girls I knew in dancing school. Very nice girl, very nice. Emily was a little nicer. Well, after the first couple of months, she and Charlie didn't see much of each other except at breakfast. It was a marriage just like any other marriage.
This is just one long string, not broken up by going back to the sometimes narrator that George is talking to FDR, but you get his voiceover a little bit interspersed when it kind of changes between eras, I guess you could say.
You find us wherever new states sprouted on the prairie. We played every town in America that had a theater.
Any mail for Mr. Cohan?
I know your father picked up his mail.
I mean for Mr. George M. Cohan.
The next 10 years rushed by like a circus train. Dad seemed content with the sticks, but I was straining at the leash.
There's your mail, Mr. Cohan.
Thanks. A couple of tickets for the show. We were playing stock in Buffalo, and being versatile, I was playing my mother's father.
So that's a very big similarity that I pulled right away. The biggest one is the fact that both of them are just about two headstrong boys just becoming rich and famous. With Citizen Kane, it's Kane becoming just this powerful newspaper mogul. While in Yankee Doodle Dandy, it's George becoming a really famous and rich playwright, retiring, and then becoming an actor again. That's kind of where the two are very, very similar, but it's not like it's the exact same thing. It's not really told in the same way, minus the flashback thing and the slight narration. And then one other small thing that I kind of noticed, which was kind of fun, but you would expect it from any kind of movie that does a flashback like the way both of these films did, is the actors wore aging makeup. Granted, Citizen Kane did it really well. This one did it pretty okay, but some of it was used for a vaudeville act, so it was a little bit more noticeable, even though it did trick a character at the beginning, which I thought was kind of funny. And my final thoughts on this, in the end, even though I really did enjoy this film, it just kind of got a little boring and didn't really feel very consequential to George's life throughout the whole thing. It really is just a retelling, a going through a person's life kind of movie. Like in Citizen Kane, he had a wife and then they broke up when he had an affair with a much younger singer, and then that whole thing dissolved. His whole thing with the newspaper and running for mayor or governor, something political, I don't quite remember off the top of my head, it's been a minute, but overall, he had consequences, and everything led to a consequence of him being all alone in Xanadu at the very end when he died. Whereas with Yankee Doodle Dandy, George is still there, still kicking, happy, gets a medal at the end, and doesn't really have any set consequences or anything bad happen. And while you might think I may choose a clip from the titular song, I decided to not do that, and I chose a clip of a line that George says a lot throughout the film, and I really like it because I think it's a line that George says a lot to keep himself a little bit humble, a little bit grounded when he does start getting a little bit bigger.
Ladies and gentlemen, my mother thanks you, my father thanks you, my sister thanks you, and I thank you.
And that is all I have for Yankee Doodle Dandy. As always, these are just my opinions, but I would love to know yours in the comments down below. If you want to know which films I have already watched or just follow my progress along in general, there's a link to a Google Doc in the description down below. Since I am not going through the list in order, I always have a hard time trying to pick out the movie for next week, and I realized that the Blu-rays I had for the next two movies I had picked out were for the 70s remakes of the ones that were on the list, so I kind of had to rethink. So I ended up deciding on watching a movie that I have been wanting to watch but never really could find the time to, and that is Heat, starring Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and a whole cast of brilliant actors. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really truly do appreciate every single one of you. Let me know who you are in the comments down below, and let's be friends. If you enjoyed this, leave a like and subscribe if you're new, because I love talking movies, TV shows, filmmaking, film history, and all that fun stuff with you, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!